I am your host, Mike Duncan, and on today's podcast, we're going to talk about, again, President Trump, but in a different context. President Trump's election, did we just dodge the coming of the Fourth Reich? Something to think about, especially with over the last couple of years, everything you heard from the left with President Trump running for election in the presidency. Everything you heard from the left was Hitler, 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 Trump's Hitler, Trump's Hitler. Even though there was nothing to prove he was Hitler, of course. He didn't exterminate anybody and didn't try for world dominance of any kind. And then when Musk was up on stage a few weeks ago and waved to the crowds, and everybody thought it was a Nazi salute, even though Kamala and Waltz and all of them did the same thing. Many politicians have done the same thing in waving, and it happens to look like a Nazi salute and yada, yada, yada. But, the Dems always tend to have a way of blaming the other side for, in my opinion, things they've mastered, whether it be Russiagate or, Trump, prosecuting his enemies, lawfare, all that good stuff. It just went on, and it got me thinking. Uh, you know, all this stuff that has been happening over the last few years, is this history repeating itself? And I started to really think about it, and I'm a TV junkie. I admit that, and watching all these TV shows, I love the History Channel. I love all those history type networks, and a lot of stuff they've been running for years has been kind of like exposés on Hitler, exposés on Nazis, the rising of the Nazi Party, World War II. And what the funny part is, one of my favorite shows that I really caught on to, was on for 4 seasons a few years back, was called Hunting Hitler. It was a show in which a team of investigators made up of former CIA folks, Army Special Forces, historians, marshals, journalists, they all came together and started researching to see if in fact Hitler did commit suicide in the bunker, or if he had a grand plan to get out of Germany. Now, if you're any, even a semi student of Hitler and World War II and all, Hitler was the ultimate narcissist. He wasn't the type of person who would, commit suicide, would kill himself. And what's funny is this investigative team traced everything back. They went through in painstaking detail of how Hitler could have gotten out of Germany, and they really traced it all the way through Europe to Spain, where he was able to get on a submarine from Spain to Argentina, and lived in Argentina and Uruguay, according to them, till the 50s. There was even eyewitness accounts of little kids who were, alive today, who were on the show saying that, he was still alive. And there was even, different towns in Argentina. If you see the pictures of all of them, it looks like they jackhammered a piece of Bavaria and dropped it right in South America. The terrain of certain countries in South America were very similar to Germany. And if you look up a town called Bariloche in Argentina, very strong German contingent there, to the point where even the people today, when they were questioned by these investigators, didn't want to talk. And basically, what happened was that after 4 seasons, the group came to the realization, or basically, they claim they proved their case that Hitler, one, did in fact escape, go to Argentina. We all hear the books about Argentina and the Nazis in Argentina hiding out. The Seinfeld even did a whole spoof on the soup Nazi, where he gave up his business and moved to Argentina, which I thought was pretty funny. But the grand plan was to create that Fourth Reich, to start it up, to achieve that unrealized world domination that they strived for during World War II. And what was funny is they were, their research showed that these guys were planning. The Nazis that did escape, they took new identities, and they were planning everything. But the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia pretty much put kind of a halt to that, temporary or otherwise. And the key that they thought was that the Nazis who wanted to start up that Fourth Reich would let the U.S. and Russia basically destroy themselves in a Cold War, which may become a hot war, and then they could move in and take their what they thought was their rightful place in history and start up the Fourth Reich and start the world dominance again. But thinking about it, this Fourth Reich and all, did it ever really die? If you look back at what Hitler really wanted to do back in the day, yeah, he wanted world dominance. He wanted to, expand. But how did he want to do that? It was through big government control. It was through National Socialism. Nazi stands for National Socialist. They wanted the definition of socialism was big government control. It was the control of what was produced and how it was allocated. The ceiling on wages that people could earn, and definitely curbing entrepreneurism. They didn't want the populace to think for themselves. They wanted them to be totally dependent on the government. What Hitler also did was try and categorize people into specific groups, mainly by race, by religion, by economic status. He wrote a lot of all this in his book Mein Kampf. If you ever read it, it lays out his plan to a T. That it came to fruition in the 30s and 40s. He was very interested in mass psychology and propaganda on the populace. He thought the weak-minded people could be controlled that way by the propaganda, by the constant messaging over and over, to the point where, if you heard something long enough, it became fact. It was the truth, even though it really wasn't. It was designed to brainwash you. The dictatorial police state rules, the brown shirts, the SSs, to control the population, uh, very much in place during Nazi Germany. And of course, the extermination of inferior individuals. Everybody knows the Dachau's and all the concentration camps that were erected to in fact, exterminate what they considered lesser people, lesser races, inferior people. In Mein Kampf, Hitler describes, Darwinism's survival of the fittest. And that's something that he, attributed to. He wanted that master race. And even, to the point of, Margaret Sanger and her idea of elimination of inferior races as well in the early 1900s, something we'll get to in a little bit. But this was all part of Hitler's plan. And if you take that and really digest all the stuff that he had in mind now, bring it to modern day. How does this correlate to today's world? Well, again, I've spoken before about control, and I always point to what you see in the World Economic Forum. You saw Klaus Schwab talking about the Great Reset of everybody. Where'd that Great Reset start? It started with the World Health Organization, or the WHO, as people refer to it as. Who started the WHO? It was the United Nations. United Nations, their ultimate goal was to, with respect to the WHO, was to control our healthcare. Okay, control how healthcare is managed and allocated and divvied out in America. Okay, now U.S. has the best healthcare in the world, has for many, many decades. Okay, but when Obama came into to presidency, what did he do? He introduced the Affordable Health Care Act of 2010, or as we all say, Obamacare. What was Obamacare institute? It was government health care to give that health care to everybody, regardless of pre-existing conditions. Okay, so if you were very sick, you could get health care. All right, you didn't have to worry about an insurance company. Basically, what happened there was, with the insurance companies, by doing so, the insurance companies would have to raise their premiums because, of course, it was a lot who would get insurance, who would pay more if you had pre-existing conditions and all, of course. But it was designed to, design what they told us to, is to give affordable health care to everybody. Basically, what it was another tax Okay, it was introduced. It was introduced to us as affordable health care. It was even given to the Supreme Court and went to the Supreme Court. And Justice Roberts rewrote it to make it a tax so they could approve it. Everybody remembers Nancy Pelosi saying we have to pass it to see what's in it. Okay, keep your existing provider, all of that. But think about the healthcare again. All right, it was healthcare given to everybody. And if you went through it, you couldn't keep your doctor. You couldn't. It wasn't. Easy to go get an appointment. You'd have to wait weeks, months, sometimes over a year for something very serious. Okay, but one thing that also came out of the Obamacare and all that plan, and if you remember back to about 2010, was the idea of what were called death panels. Um, Death panels were created under Obama, and it was a panel of individuals who basically said who was worthy of health care. Okay, who they decided who was worthy of health care, and the first group of the population we pointed to was the elderly. Okay, elderly, as you're getting older, they need more health care, but these panels were there to decide whether they deserved additional health care, where they were deserving of that extra money to be spent on the health care. And a lot of times those death panel people, they were there to say, oh, maybe this person isn't worthy of it. Let them go, let them die. Or this person, maybe they still have something to contribute to society. Maybe we'll give them a little health care to keep it up. It was the most, evil idea, yet it was something that Obamacare rolled out. Okay. The death panels not only were for the elderly, but also for the disabled. Who was worthy of health care among the disabled individuals? It's very, people remember Sarah Palin at the time saying, my Down syndrome child, you know, then my Down syndrome child would have to go before this panel as well, just to get, everyday health care. Was it worth it? It was almost like, belittling human life. And I go from that to the hot topic for the left, and that's abortion. All right, abortion is, exterminating a child in the womb. All right, the left continues to push it and push it. It's their political narrative. You want to drive a liberal nuts who's big pro-abortion. When they say they're pro-choice, you say, "Oh, you're pro-abortion." They can't handle that word abortion. They always say pro-choice because it's a changing of the narrative. They have a hard time dealing with that. But again, it's basically murder of a person in the womb, defenseless human being. Okay, who is the biggest proponent of abortion in America? In the 19th century, in the 1900s and the 2000s. Well, everybody knows about Planned Parenthood. Who started Planned Parenthood? Well, the founder was somebody who Hillary Clinton said she admired greatly, and that was Margaret Sanger. All right, in the early 1900s, Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood to basically eliminate the lesser races, which morphed into abortion and eliminating babies in the womb, unwanted births. Who was one of Margaret Sanger's biggest fans? None other than Adolf Hitler. Okay. Adolf Hitler was one of the biggest fans, took many notes of her practices and implemented them, with respect to the concentration camps, applied a lot of what he learned through Margaret Sanger. Now, fast forward, Planned Parenthood. We know about Planned Parenthood. Trump he defunded them in his first term, and he's doing the same thing now. But go back a few years. Who was the president of Planned Parenthood? Oh, it was a gentleman named Bill Gates. Not the Bill Gates from Microsoft. No, it was his father. But Bill Gates Jr. seemed to, he took on a lot of ideas from his father when it came to vaccines and testing those vaccines, especially on, children in Africa, children in India. Look it up. They're not the biggest fans of Bill Gates, but we'll get to that in a little bit as well. But anyway, that's the messaging for the abortion and insurance and all that. It leads to the overall messaging, in the media. I would go back to Mein Kampf. Hitler loved the fact that we can use mass psychology and propaganda to dupe the populace, categorizing individuals into groups, by race, religion, economic status. It brainwashed people into thinking this is where I belong. This is where I belong. I have to stay with my kind or think like my kind. It totally eliminated you know folks' individual thought, and whatever the government said, whatever the idiot talking out of the TV was saying to me was the right thing. It was a brainwashing. You go back now, that's we've seen that now, with all the messaging, all the networks, the CNNs, the ABCs, the MSNBCs. The messaging is always the same. Again, it's something you hear enough of it, and well, you start believing it if it's said over and over to you, even though it is propaganda. Go back to the end of World War II. There's a very famous movement that people know. Some people know because of the Marvel movies, but it's called Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was a concept designed to bring a lot of the Nazi scientists and influencers into America to do good. I guess is what the government folks were saying. Do good for America. And a lot of ideas that they did in Nazi Germany were brought to America and adopted into America. One, were there any good things? I like to say there was the space race. I don't think without the German scientists, we would have been able to get a rocket off the ground for the most part. They were the experts in the rocket field. The bad, well, just about everything else that they brought over was bad. Mainly the experiments. The Nazi doctors experimented over and over on the folks in the concentration camps with vaccines, viruses, just to see how people reacted to it, so they could use it for their own purposes. They also were very much into mind control, full blown mind control, the use of hypnosis, electromagnetic means of any kind, even drug use such as LSD. There's something else you might not have heard of, but it was out there back then and probably is still in society today, is the MK Ultra experiments, where again they experimented on people using the drugs, using electromagnetic means, keeping people up for days at a time, keeping them sleep for days at a time, and hooking them up with earphones and sending the messaging, getting to them on a subconscious level, making them do things they really don't want to do. One of my favorite movies of back in the day too is The Manchurian Candidate, where it was a lot of drug use and hypnosis, where they used a number of U.S. soldiers and hypnotized them, one in particular, to, in essence, build an assassin who has no recollection of what he did and basically can't give him up. It's one of the all-time classic movies with Frank Sinatra and Lawrence Harvey. But that was MK Ultra. That was during the Korean War in that book, in the movie. But that was MK Ultra. It's been used to this day. Look, any school shooting you see, you see a kid with no criminal history, no reason to go shoot up a school in Sandy Hook, no reason to get up on a roof and take a shot at President Trump in a field in Pennsylvania, but all of a sudden they're doing it. Are these folks MK Ultra? I'm guessing it is. But again, it goes beyond that too. And these MK Ultra people who are built to be assassins. You want to go back to JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King Jr. It all seems like everyone's a conspiracy theory. Did Lee Harvey Oswald shoot Kennedy? No, we don't think so. Did Sirhan shoot Robert Kennedy? You go look it up. He probably didn't, but it might have been somebody who was under the influence of an MK Ultra who could kill somebody and again had no memory of it. It could not give himself up. And even now you see a lot of these folks who are go on those shooting rampages, they're killed on the scene. Dead man can't tell any tales. That's an old saying too. So again, the mind control, the MK Ultra control, even the electromagnetic means. I like to say, why did we go to 5G these days? All right, I have friends in the communication industries who told me the difference between 4G and 5G is nothing. Why was there an upgrade to do it? Why were there all new grids put up, new telephone poles? Could there be a link to, the vax, the mRNA? Who knows? But it doesn't make sense that, we switch from 4G to 5G when there's really not much of a difference. So again, something to think about it. And again, bringing to modern day, from the Nazi era to then, how they experimented electromagnetically on us. Then they could be doing it now. The TVs with the programming and all of that. It could be a sense of mind control. You never know. But again, bringing something else to modern day, I always like to say, follow the money trail. All right. And I like to look back at the Nazis, how they rose up, where their financing and everything came. And through different research, one thing I found out about the financing came from various different means, but one in particular I always found very interesting, especially because of the U.S. connections, and that is of the powers that be who financed the Nazis back in the day. It included somebody named Prescott Bush, who was a U.S. senator. And you say Prescott Bush? Yeah, Prescott Bush. He was the father of George Herbert Walker Bush and the grandfather of W. Two gentlemen who became president of this country. All right, but Prescott Bush had very interesting connections. He not only financed a lot of the Nazi work, but also profited from it through different companies. Now, back in the day, Prescott Bush, he worked for Brown Brothers Harriman, a company that's still around today. And Brown Brothers at the time acted as a U.S. base for an industrialist in Germany named Fritz Thyssen. All right, Thyssen was a big Hitler supporter at the time in the 30s, helped his rise, helped finance his rise until he had a falling out in the early 40s. But Thyssen helped finance Hitler, and Bush supported a lot of that, a lot of the financing. Prescott Bush was also the director of a New York-based company called Union Banking Corp that also represented Thyssen's interests. Is that by coincidence or no? I think in a lot of these cases there's no coincidences. This was planned, and Bush's investment and involvement with the Nazis became so prominent that they were deemed a threat to national security, and a lot of his assets were seized in 1942 by the Alien Property Commission under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Think about that, the Trading with the Enemy Act. They seized a lot of his assets through Brown Brothers, through the Union Banking Corporation. How is that? Okay. Now, think about it. That's Prescott Bush in the 40s. Okay. His son, George Herbert Walker Bush, Senator, congressman from Texas, became president of the United States, was the head of the CIA in the 70s, opened up China to America back then too. All right. He became president. All right. The grandson, W, very influential too, became prominent, ran for public office, and he became president. How is it that when the Bushes were coming up, when George H.W. Bush was vice president to Reagan and then became president, where was all the media reporting on these ties to Nazi Germany? Where were they? They weren't anywhere. You never heard of any of this. Okay, which is it's really weird. And the Bushes from time to time have been questioned about it, and of course their response is always no comment. That just seems a little strange. Okay. Now, moving on from the Bushes, because we don't want to get too deep into that, but I always like to look at something else that is the darling of the left-wing media these days after abortion is gun rights and Second Amendment rights. How many times have we heard, "Oh, I need to take the guns away after, the Sandy Hook shooting, after this shooting, after that shooting." Oh, you can't have guns. Can't got to take away the guns. Media is saying, "Oh, it's the guns' fault that all these murders happen." Yeah, well, how many car accidents do we have in this world where, do we take away the cars? No, it's most of the time it's blamed on the driver. How about, stabbings? Are we banning knives? Right? No, it's the person who's stabbing somebody, murdering somebody. If you're a high school kid, you're like, I failed my test. What's the pencil's fault? No, it's not the pencil's fault. It's the kid who held the pencil. Just like it's the kid who held the gun or the person who held the gun in a murder. It's the person's fault. You never see NRA guys committing these type of crazy murders and all. It's the it's just another reason for the left wing media to say, guns are bad, try and grab the guns. Because go back to Nazi Germany. What did the Nazis do in the 30s and into the 40s? They took away the populist guns, they confiscated guns. The population became compliant, became, just totally dependent on the German government and basically defenseless. So when the Germans ended up coming for these people, coming to take them away to concentration camps, they were defenseless. They couldn't fight back because they had their arms taken for the most part. Something that, again, does the government today in America want to do that? I don't know. But why is it that, Second Amendment rights are constantly being harped upon by the media? It doesn't make sense. And then throw into the fact of censorship. We saw a lot of the censorship on the internet, and all of that. You want to post something on Facebook, if it went against their algorithms or something, it was immediately taken down, or you couldn't even post it, or you got banned for a week or a month. Twitter was the same way before Musk took it over, and even with Musk, he still has some guidelines there. Well, what were the Nazis doing in the 30s and 40s? I remember seeing pictures of piles of books, 1, 2 stories high, with flames galore, burning the books. Couldn't read for yourself. Couldn't think for yourself. They had to burn the books. Did it make sense back then? No. Does it make sense now? No. Censorship, it's always been there. The messaging, again, from the media is usually one-sided, unless you watch, the occasional Fox show or Newsmax show where it's given maybe a right-leaning version of it that's not centrist. But again, the censorship goes beyond just, oh, let's cut you off Facebook. They want to control the narrative. And it's not unlike what Hitler was doing back in the 30s in Germany. And even in America, we've had censorship over the years. But you look back to the Alien Sedition Act of 1798, or when Lincoln imprisoned reporters. That was false news that went against against the country. It was anti-American. The stuff you see on TV now is a lot of it's all anti-American, but they make it seem like the norm. Something that we really have to take a deeper look at. Censorship again. Did it come back? Is it the Fourth Reich trying to peek its head up to say, let's test this out. Let's see if we can do this. Who knows? But again, I look back at what was in history back in the day, and I look to now modern days. And there's a couple instances in very recent days where it's the Fourth Reich really coming out strong. And the first being the attack on the Jews by pro-Palestinians in America. We saw this front and center last year when the Columbia University and a lot of colleges around the country were taken over by these pro-Palestinian people. The Jewish students were attacked, were banned from going into buildings. All right, the anti-Semitism was rampant all over different college campuses and in cities. Sound familiar? Looking back 70 years, it's exactly what was happening in Germany, the anti-Semitism. It's what the Germans were doing to students at the University of Vienna. People don't realize this, but need to look it up. I mean, I knew people who, kids were not Jewish, but they were, in the same dorms as Jewish students at these schools. They were in the same fraternities as these kids, and they had to watch themselves because of this mindless attack, this anti-Semitism that was fed to them by the mainstream media. And the powers that be were complicit. They allowed it to happen. Just like the Nazis back in the day who said, I'm just taking orders, I'm just doing my job. That's not good enough. All right. They had Nuremberg trials for a lot of those folks back in the day who did some really horrific stuff. I'm not saying we need to go back to that nowadays, but it's just another example of maybe the Fourth Reich coming to the forefront, coming to modern day and peeking and saying, let's try this, let's try this. The anti-Semitism was unbelievable last year. And then throw in the fact the new term of the day from the right was lawfare. All right, not warfare, lawfare. How the powers that be went after Trump. Would Trump have had to go to court if he wasn't running for president? Not at all. All right, they wanted to silence him. They wanted to eliminate their, political opponents, and they tried to get him, convicted, thrown in jail, so he couldn't become president. Well, what did Hitler do? What did Stalin do? What did Mussolini do back in the day? They jailed all their political opponents so that there was never a political election of call. They could, be a dictator and stay in charge. Okay. And even the folks who spoke out against their leaders, they could be jailed. They could be executed or sent to Siberia concentration camps back in the day. Okay. Lawfare has come back. Hopefully it's done now that Trump is elected, but they gave it their best shot. They wanted to basically eliminate their political opponents through the lawfare. And that's something that, the Nazis and the communists, they made an art of back in the day. And thank God that, President Trump beat the raps and all, became president. And, he's trying to fix things now, of course. But I like to say that, history repeats itself. All right. Anybody who doesn't believe that, you're fooling yourself. Got to take a look. And you got to be wary of it as well. We all saw the signs of the Fourth Reich during the Obama administration. And during Trump's first term, they went after him for everything, made up or not. They tried, to derail his presidency with the Russia gate, and then during the Biden administration, it was all ramped up. But the Trump administration's only a couple weeks old, and he's starting to pretty much dismantle all of this. Again, I go back to the Manchurian Candidate. I love to quote different movies, as you'll see. And one of my favorite quotes is at the end when Sinatra's character, realizes how they brainwashed Raymond Shaw and Lawrence Harvey's character through just a trigger mechanism using a game of solitaire. It's like, how about a nice game of solitaire? And then he goes right into the brainwashing mode. And Sinatra breaks the code, and he basically tells them it's all over. The beautifully conditioned links are smashed as of now because we say it should. We're busting up the joint. We're tearing the wires up. The ball game is over. Well, I like to think that with Trump's election, nobody is busting it up and tearing up the computerly conditioned links to an evil past more than Trump. We've seen it in the first couple weeks, and I think it's going to continue. So I think any designs on the Fourth Reich or any idea of it, I think they're pretty much over. So hope you enjoyed the podcast. I always like to promote our book that my friend Joe Connor and I wrote a few years ago called The New Founders. You can find information on it at thenewfounders.net. You can look up our blog site at wewinamerica.com. And Joe wrote a second book that has been made into a movie called Shattered Lives. And you could check out the trailer and rent or buy it at shatteredlives.us. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hope it got you thinking. And this is Slam Dunk signing out. Have a good night.